All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Android Design in Action. My name is Roman Nurik, and with me here today is Adam Koch and Nick Butcher.
Oh.
So today we're going to be talking about shopping list apps and the contextual action bar. And before we jump in, I just want to remind everybody what this show is all about. So on Android Design in Action, we take a look at apps that have been previously reviewed on the App Clinic, which is on Fridays. And we take a look at how we can improve some of the screens, some of the visual designs in the screens of those apps. And then more recently, we've been diving into specific topics. For example, a few weeks ago, we did responsive design, meaning designing for tablets and phones and basically any screen size on a spectrum of devices. Today, like I said, we're going to be talking about the contextual action bar. So let's jump in with the very first app that we'll look at, which was done last week or reviewed last week on the App Clinic, and that app is Grocery IQ. So before we jump into the redesign, let's talk about what this app does. And so this app basically lets you manage a number of different lists or shopping lists. So let's say you have a favorite bakery nearby or a favorite supermarket nearby, and you know that they sell certain products. So what you can do is you can actually create a shopping list and create or add items to your list that are broken up by the different stores in which you would buy them. So the bakery may have breads and cereals and things like that, and the grocery store, supermarket may have other things. So one of the key differences between this app and other shopping list apps is the ability to kind of break things up in that way. Also, it lets you, let's just zoom into the screens here, it lets you look at some coupons for different products that you may want to buy, maybe contextually relevant or not. It lets you store favorites, lets you do a lot of different types of things. So it's basically a shopping list that lets you kind of neatly categorize your different items and lets you also look at coupons as well. Before we jump in, have you guys used this app at all, or do you have any other thoughts on the initial background on this app?
Nope.
No?
Not really. I actually I did try it a little while back, and unfortunately for me, when I see the design look kind of dated like this, I usually go and just sort of uninstall it immediately. So I didn't get to sort of try it out too much, unfortunately.
Yeah, and this app is, to be fair, I mean, like it's using some of the older patterns, some of the gingerbread styling, like the tabs. Actually, about a year or so ago, they'd probably, or maybe 2 years ago, those would be perfectly normal tabs. They're actually using the correct guidelines for the icons and so on and so forth for tabs, but it's really just kind of dated. That's exactly how I'd put it.
And of course the menu button,
yeah,
the button of shame down the bottom that the guys from the App Clinic mentioned as well.
Yeah, the legacy menu button is something that should really just go away, and we have a solution for that anyway. But yeah, and the other issue here is that it's using some of the kind of the gradients that you'd find on other platforms, kind of those stark gradients, and also just these kind of 1-pixel text shadows. This is something we haven't really talked about before in the show, but another thing that developers do a lot, aside from gradients and things like that, is adding these tiny little shadows to kind of give a sense of depth to your text. And on Android, I mean, it's perfectly fine to do. You can do it in a lot of cases, but oftentimes it's done without real thought as to why. Is there a reason for doing this? And I think in this case it works fairly well because it's very subtle. But if you were to move over to the kind of the hollow visual styling, the new modern Android UI look and feel, you should try to avoid kind of things like that, kind of those things that add a subtle sense of depth. It's almost unnecessary. But again, it's totally fine if the rest of your visual design matches with that. And the other thing that we like to point out is right-facing carrots. Actually, on this screen, touching the list items here doesn't really do anything. It actually does nothing. But to get into the details, you actually have to touch this secondary action or the secondary touch area on the list item. And then to check the item, you just touch this checkbox. So some of these things make sense, some of them not so much. So we wanted to kind of rethink how you could approach this screen in this app in general. So let's jump into the redesigned screen. Hopefully let's get to 100%. Okay, so let's jump into the redesigned screen. So as we always do, we've added a proper action bar. We've added some iconography, some branding in the top left. We added a single checkout action button, and checkout is if you'll notice back here, checkout is something that, after you check the items that you've purchased, you can press checkout and it moves those items into your history, so that then, next time you're shopping or such, you can just bring things into your list directly from your history. So that's kind of a neat little feature, and we decided to move that as a primary action in the action bar. We also added spinner navigation at the top, so that, and we'll show details on that in a second, but basically it lets you switch between the different stores, and you'll see later it lets you manage stores and things like that as well. And then for the actual list itself, we've presented the same old list, but to actually jump into the details, you just touch once on the text here. And just as before, you can check the box to the left to mark it as complete, but it doesn't actually move it into a completely separate area. Once it's checked, it stays put, which is probably a safer interaction, a more consistent interaction. The other thing I should mention is that we've also brought up coupons. This is one thing I wanted to talk about, and it seems like coupons in this app, and I think the developer is coupons.com, it seems like coupons are a fairly important part of either the business model or maybe it's revenue driving, I don't really know, but coupons seemed fairly important, but they weren't immediately visible. So one way in which we tried to bring that out more is to make it more contextually relevant. So if there's a coupon for one of the items in your list, let's say nearby, like at a store nearby, there's a coupon for it, it'll show up as a secondary action here with the number of coupons found. And then touching that takes you to the coupon detail screen. And we also decided that, why not make coupons a secondary section at the bottom, right? Either, let's say I have no list items, I have nothing on my shopping list, why not just show coupons? Hey, I forgot to get soup the other week, and there's a coupon for soup, so let me just pop that into my shopping list. But also, if you do have lots of shopping list items, then you're probably not so much worried about other products. You probably want to just get rid of those products and buy those, and not worry about anything else. And so coupons moves all the way to the bottom of that. And then we use a different visual indicator, this kind of almost faux torn edge, and this is borderline skeuomorphic, but it doesn't really matter. It's kind of the secondary part of the screen that shows you that this is clearly a different part of the app and a different set of items. So it's a clear visual delineation. And then we've also used kind of this blue accent color throughout to indicate that this is a coupon. Kind of like on Google.com, you see the ads, the text ads in search results on a yellow background. This would be kind of similar. So you present a visual theme throughout that says, hey, blue is advertising, or blue is coupons, and green is your stuff. So that's kind of one of the ways to think about that. And the last thing I want to point out on this screen before, if you guys want to chime in, is this bar at the top. And this is something that Adam and I talked about beforehand, and Nick as well, I believe, is really like, how do you present adding items or searching for stuff? And in this case, searching and adding is really part of the same flow. And we decided to make it kind of a first-class citizen. Rather than an action button, we've put it in line at the very top of the list. So that's all I wanted to mention. Adam, remember you had thoughts on search and add. You want to talk about some alternatives, or?
Yeah, I guess one thing I wanted to sort of talk about was, you can always have an action item, but if the action is really important, you can put it in line, like Roman has shown here. But I guess if you did want to, you could move that sort of add or search box back into the action bar as an action item, and maybe trigger the sort of contextual search that shows actually directly in the action bar itself. So that's just an alternative, totally up to the designer of the app as to how they actually want to implement this.
Yeah, almost kind of like an expanding search view, but maybe it's an expanding ad view.
Yep.
And then
interesting approach, yeah.
Yeah, and then in one of the later apps, Nick will talk about some similar ways in which he approached this in Out of Milk. But anyway, let's move on to the next screen for the interest of time. So the next screen, again, since this is about the contextual action bar, this is just briefly showing that, let's say I wanted to immediately, take action on 3 or 4 of those items. I could just long press to start selection, and that pops up the contextual action bar at the top. and then keep single touching different items in my list to add or remove from the selection, and then take action on that entire selection. So in this case, I've selected Hogarden and McAllen. Hopefully I've spelled McAllen right. Hogarden and McAllen, and then let's say I've gone ahead and bought those items at the store, I can just select both and press Mark Purchased to take action immediately on those two items. And in the next screen, this is an example of that drop down, and this is kind of interesting. This is something that we took a few liberties with. A spinner, or I guess drop down / spinner navigation. Usually, you just see the items which you're switching between, right? So in a normal case, you'd see grocery store, bakery, or any store, meaning like all of the above. But in this case, since I thought that since this is like the single place where users see their list of stores, this is like the most visible place in the app where they see their list of stores. Let's make it easy to also then take action on that list, to then maybe add a store to that list right from here. This is something that Ian mentioned last week on the App Clinic. It's a missed opportunity if you see a list of things and you want to add one, but you then can't figure out how to do it. So this way, it makes it very obvious. It's a slight deviation from the standard pattern, but I personally feel that it's a fairly reasonable deviation. And then the other thing is that there's also favorites and history, and to navigate to those items, and again, they're still lists of tasks really at the end of the day, you can jump into favorites and history right from here with this kind of separate section. So any criticisms or thoughts or alternatives?
Well, why don't we throw it over to Nick quickly?
For me, like looking at the original design, it just kind of screamed gingerbread. To me, it was. I think the refresh that you've given it makes it look much more modern, much more at home on my device running Jelly Bean or whatever the latest OS everyone is running. And also, it feels easier to use because the standard iconography and the standard controls from the modern palette just are very familiar to me. So I think this is a really lovely redesign.
Yeah, and thank you. And one other thing that we should probably talk about at the end is the difference between selection and checkboxes. And there's lots of different ways you can go about this. And I think, Nick, you tried an alternative out of Milk, but we should definitely talk about it at the very end if we have some time, since that's something that specifically with task list apps or list apps that can be confusing in some cases. So the last screen that we have here is with editing a store, and then we'll jump over to Out of Milk. So when editing a store, you have the option to edit the store name, and then if you'll notice here, you can add or reorder aisles as well as hide aisles. But it seems like in this case, this is really kind of like a sub-dashboard pattern. Rather than giving you the content immediately, the list of aisles, it just gives you the options in which you can take on that list. So rather than doing that, we felt that it would be just a better user experience to show everything at once. So you can immediately edit the name as well as reorder and hide aisles. So we're also using this the done discard pattern at the very top. So rather than seeing like a save button or anything like that, we see very clear options to either cancel what we just did or save by pressing the done button. And then here you'll notice that we use these subtle drag handles to allow you to reorder items. And then the rest of the list item, the rest of that touch area is a single touch target to show or hide. So touching it basically toggles its visibility. And you'll notice that there isn't a separator between this visibility marker and the rest of the list item, and that's to indicate that it's a single touch target, not two separate targets. And then obviously you can add an aisle by pressing the plus button there. And of course, I mean, if you long touch, maybe there should be contextual action bar there as well. Haven't really mocked it up, but yeah. So anyway, parting thoughts for Grocery IQ, guys?
No, I think the direct manipulation is much better than having to go through each level. I think the same way you surface coupons up to a high level, it makes it easier to use if you don't have to pogo stick, as they say, in and out of different screens.
Yeah.
Yeah, I also like that coupons tear off that you have at the bottom there, just because, as you say, it's probably important to their business. The company itself is called Coupons. But also, like, it sort of dynamically grows and shrinks based on what the real content is on that particular screen. So I think it's a nice way of showing everything on one screen.
Yeah, the other thing is that, if you have no empty, or if you have an empty list, if you have no items in that list, then I mean naturally you think, oh, let's just show no items in this list text and that's it, right? So the user opens up the app and they immediately see an empty list. And so showing coupons is another way of presenting more useful information without having to fill the space with like useless stuff. So
and likewise, if the list is really, really long, those coupons aren't going to get directly in your way. They're going to get pushed down off the screen, and the content is still going to be seen there at the front.
And I mean, worst case, if you find that users don't like interact with coupons as much because of that, then you can always have like an overflow item or something else in the action bar or something that leads you to that screen. So let's jump into Out of Milk. How much time we have?
Yeah, we're good.
All right. OK, so let's jump into Out of Milk. Nick, do you want to talk about Out of Milk?
Yeah, absolutely. So Out of Milk is a kind of a to-do list type application, but very focused on shopping lists. So when you come in, it gives you free, ready-made kind of list selections like a shopping list, a to-do list, and something else I forget. So it's quite focused on that. It's a slight kind of twist on like the regular to-do list. It's kind of got some extra functionality in there. So you can see here in the action bar, you have the ability to use a barcode scanner, which is kind of cool. So you can add items to it. And you also have the option to add some metadata around each of the items in your list. So for example, you can see milk here, you can give it a price, and then you can get a summary of the total price remaining in your basket of goods to pick up at the bottom. So yeah, I've dived in. So you come in on a dashboard pattern. I've dived into one of the main screens, like viewing a list, and you have this kind of spinner navigation for flitting between the two. I think when I look at the screen, the first thing that stands out to me is that despite the fact they're using an action bar and have an overflow button there, they also have the button of shame, as we're calling it, the emulated menu button down at the bottom. So this is kind of perplexing to me that they kind of have both, especially because the emulated button doesn't really do anything down at the bottom. They're just setting a target SDK of 10, I believe, even though they're providing styles and using Action Bar Sherlock, I believe, to have an action bar on platforms that support it. There's a few issues as well, if you take a look at their action bar, that I think to speak to some of the points that Roman's made in the past about if you're going to use an action bar, kind of really try and follow the standard patterns to it and don't kind of like deviate away from it. So first up with the action bar, I'd say the overflow button is kind of like too heavily styled. If you look at the normal action bars, the overflow is slightly less prominent. It's about a 50% opacity in order to de-emphasize the kind of the secondary tasks compared to the primary actions. And also some of the icons don't really have the hollow styling. If you look at the spinner isn't really attached to the shopping list. It's kind of like orphaned over across to the side. There's this, which is especially bad in tablets. When if you're in a landscape in a tablet, it's kind of 3/4 of the screen away from the thing it's supposed to be marking up as being clickable. And there's some delimiters between the icons. And on top of that, there's also a fair amount of skeuomorphic style and kind of like just really like non-hollow, non-native platform styling in the application. Any other thoughts on the apps from you guys before we dive into what we've done with it?
It's like they've kind of gone halfway with the skeuomorphic thing, but not all the way, which is almost worse than just going all the way, if you ask me.
Yeah, it's kind of tough. I think you guys are right that it's like a bit too skeuomorphic, but at the same time, I feel like following the interactions. To me personally, I mean, following the interactions is first and foremost. And to me, the greater issue here, I think, is with kind of the extra overflow or the legacy menu button. Things like that just fundamentally break some of the expectations that users have. But yeah, I do agree that the skeuomorphism is like somewhere there's a spectrum, right? There's like pure minimalism and then like pure skeuomorphism or kind of realism, whatever. And I feel like they chose a place on that spectrum that's a little further to the right.
Before we go on to the redesign, just a few words on the interaction design here. So the way the app currently works, if you single tap on an item in the list, it then pops up a kind of old style quick action bar, which lets you do things like edit it or mark it as done, for example. And if you long press on an item, it then puts a score through it and moves it to the bottom, like denoting that it's done. So you kind of have these two levels that says like an item in the list, then you can have it scored through, or then you can actually delete it to totally remove it. So there's many permutations of state which an item can be in, and because of this, if you disclose the overflow menu, I don't think we've got a screenshot of it here, but if you do, there is a plethora of options there. You actually have to scroll it on a Galaxy Nexus. There's that many overflow options, which I found to be a bit kind of overloaded me.
And using, I mean, this is kind of against the concept of direct manipulation, which is one of the the design principles in our design guide. Items should be manipulable. You should be able to touch them, to interact with them, rather than choosing actions somewhere else to do things like trigger selection or like select all, deselect all. Anything like that should really be more contextual. And in general, I mean, if you look at just for long press, I think that's particularly egregious in this case, where long press, we've tried to standardize on what long press means, and really it means selection. It triggers selection and then potentially showing actions on your selection. So using it for anything else like marking an item as complete, it's kind of beyond what the standards are, and it's just another thing that users have to learn. One other thing that I guess we use for long press is when you long press on an action button, on an icon-only button, it shows you a little tooltip, but that's kind of that's a secondary use for it. It's not as important a use as selection.
Sure.
So
Sorry,
Nick, I just wanted to mention that I've been showing your redesign already by accident. So unfortunately, we don't have a big reveal, but go ahead and jump in.
Okay, yep. So if we do take a look at the redesign that you've been looking at for all this time, then we can see we've applied some hollow styling to it. So we've used some familiar language, visual language in the application to make it a bit easier to see. It's actually quite interesting that Roman and I did our redesigns in isolation and have used some quite similar metaphors like the drag handles and so on throughout. But I guess that's why they're standard, right? But the other thing I didn't really mention is there's some really cool information and cool actions you can do buried in the overflow menu on the original, such as to share this list with someone else or send it to using the normal Android sharing with intents, which is kind of lost in all the noise in the overflow menu, I thought. So one of the main things, apart from applying hollow styling to the look and feel, is I've kind of promoted add to being this permanent inline action, similar to Roman did with the search and add. So you have this bar there, which breaks out of the standard rhythm of the rest of the page in order to make it more prominent. And I've also broken down the using a microphone or the barcode as kind of sub-actions of adding. They're different kind of ways of adding an item to your list. So they kind of like belong together rather than having separate action items. So by bringing add into the page itself, it's given me some room in the action bar to promote some of the unique and very, very cool functionality that this application offers, and then tuck the less used and much smaller set of alternative actions under the overflow. So we've also changed up the interaction a little bit here as well. You can see I've placed some checkboxes next to the items, which allow you to go into a selection mode. So I've actually kind of flipped the concept or changed the concept a little bit and got rid of the idea of like a semi kind of strike through done state and just gone straight to a dismiss state. So I decided to use the kind of the swipe to dismiss pattern that we're seeing gaining traction these days as the way to mark items off. So this is speaking to Roman's point about direct manipulation of your data being much more satisfying. So what you can actually do, here we go.
So it's really like swipe to complete rather than swipe to delete. I wrote swipe to delete here, but it's like swipe to mark as completed, basically, right?
Yeah.
Cool.
So this is a bit of a change to the pattern because I guess in the old way you would long press it, it'd be struck through, so it'd still be able to get it back quickly. So it's a way to give you that kind of safety net, that way to easily recover any data that you've kind of marked as complete. We've also used a new pattern, an emerging pattern of the kind of undo. So when you swipe away an item to say it's done, we actually temporarily show this undo option in line where it was. The idea here being that you can, until you interact with the screen again, this will stay there. So it gives you this chance to say, oh, actually, I checked the wrong item, whatever. But the minute you start scrolling or touching another item, the idea is that this would kind of close up and fill the list in.
So next we're on the quick return. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is to go with the idea that we've made add this really kind of prominent item, but we wanted to kind of cope with the case that you might be having too many kind of layers of items at the top. You have an action bar, sometimes you might have tabs. If you had an inline kind of prominent action, you end up running out of room, especially if you're in, say, landscape view where you have less kind of vertical space. So I'm using here a pattern which we've been dubbing quick return, which I think is a really, really cool way to kind of handle that problem. So the idea here is if you had a lot of items, so here I'm making a lasagna, and I've got a lot of items in my list. I let the user, as they scroll away, the add button, this kind of the horizontal bar, will scroll out of view. But the minute they start kind of like dragging back down, it'll jump right back in and kind of be this floating item. So what this really does, it kind of lets you maximize the amount of space you have to play with in the screen and show the items on the list. So if you're searching through the list looking for a particular item to check off, then it gives you the maximum space to present that. But it makes adding a new item like super simple and always very convenient to do.
And this is similar to, like you mentioned, Google Now and also Google Plus has this, right? So Google Plus, if you're in the stream and you scroll, if you scroll down, the buttons that let you post to the stream scroll off. But then as soon as you start kind of slowly inching up again, it pops those back in. Yep.
That's the idea.
Yeah, that's nice.
So should we move on to contextual actions?
Yeah. So the next thing I wanted to cover here. So in the old application, if you tapped on an item, you get this quick bar which let you perform a number of actions upon a single item. So the new way of doing this really is using the contextual action bar. So here, if you long press, or I say tap on the check mark, you go into this contextual selection mode. So here we selected one item, and using the contextual action bar, you can edit, or the second icon on the action bar there is you can move it to another list or delete the item straight from there. The power of using the contextual action bar, I believe, is not only this very consistent with the platform way of handling selection, but it's also great for dealing with multi-select. So here you can see the limiter which says one item selected is actually a drop-down. So right here I could disclose that, and you might get options to select all, or in this example here I've tapped another item in the list, and it's let me do contextual actions. So here you can see, because I'm dealing with two items selection rather than one, we've actually refined the selection. So we said that edit might not be applicable to multiple items, and it's refined it down to using two actions here. So it's a really kind of very neat way of performing quite powerful kind of selection actions.
Yeah, so unless you have like a batch edit mode or something where like you batch apply a tag or something, then yeah, removing that edit icon makes sense.
Cool. And just for fun, to stick with the metaphor we've been using of using the swipe to mark something as completed, we thought we'd keep it if you're selecting multiple items at once, you could then still swipe across on one of these items and it would mark each of them as completed.
That's cool. I've never seen that done before, but that looks like it might work really, really well. It's very cool.
Just a fun idea.
It'd be kind of cool to hint that you can do that by, when the user selects the actual contextual action item, you could have the animation play and have the undo in place still. And that way they know next time they could probably just go and swipe themselves. I like that. That's cool.
Yeah, this might be one of those cases we talked about the showcase view last week, where if there isn't something completely apparent by what's on screen, like a gesture you have to perform, I think it's okay to hint it the first time the user sees it, that you could show some kind of animation saying, because it's so core to a to-do list to mark something is done. I think it wouldn't be too egregious to show it on the first run and then let the and teach the user that way.
Mm-hmm. That could work. And also, just wanted to point out that that's a great thing that you pointed out, is that showing an animation hints at a gesture. So, for example, when you have a tab or tabs with a view pager, when you switch tabs, you call pager.setCurrentItem, but calling that, it actually slides the contents. So it's a subtle hint that you can actually then throw your finger on the glass and start swiping across the different tabs. So it's definitely a good way to hint at a gesture, is to show an animation that replays the gesture basically without the user interacting.
Cool.
All right, so let's jump into a few other examples of the contextual action bar, since we wanted to talk about it. Before we jump into all the details. Oh wow, we're super low on time, so we're going to have to fly through this. Contextual action bar basically lets you show multiple actions on a selection, or it enters a mode basically where you can take action on selections. Anybody else have anything to add on the contextual action bar?
And
Since
we're
we're
done.
running
No.
super long on time. Okay, you know what? Rather than do that, let's just fly through some of these. These are just some examples of apps that use it. So the gallery lets you take actions on multiple photos. Gmail lets you take action on multiple items. And then this is an open source example, a Google I/O app, which basically lets you, it shows a contextual action bar for this master detail flow on a tablet. So if you select multiple items, even if you're looking at one or a different one, you can take action items without even looking at them. And this is another example of an app called Tasks by Team Tasks that lets you take actions like indent or unindent, I guess, different items within a task list all at once. So yeah, sorry.
Yeah, I just on contextual action bar, I'd say you might have guessed that we're huge fans of the action bar because it's familiar and very powerful and very flexible. So using contextual action bar lets you have the same power of the action bar, but to do these contextual actions. So you can still do things like have a split action bar. So Gmail on phones, for example, has a plethora of options which it offers you can do on an email. So you can still use that split action bar to offer up all those different things. So I'm a big fan of it.
Yeah, definitely use it if you can, and I believe Action Bar Sherlock also supports the contextual action bar, so you don't have to worry about backwards compatibility and things like that. Anyway, let's fly through. Next week, that's it for the content for the show today. Actually, I guess we have design news in a bit. Next week, we're going to be doing a Google Plus Hangout, and we'd like to invite you all to join. So if you're interested in talking to us live on this show at this same time, and if you want to ask us questions, or if you want to show some of your work by screen sharing, or if you just want to rant about Android design, please let us know if you can join, if you can make it. Let us know in the comments on pretty much anywhere, and we'll invite you next week, maybe about 10 or 15 minutes before the show airs, and then we'll have a 30-minute hangout to discuss. And we may be announcing giveaways or anything like that, so you may want to tune in. And definitely, like I said, let us know if you can join. But let's fly through Android design news. We don't have that much. Nick, do you want to talk about your live redesign?
Yeah, this was a fun. I think I mentioned last week that I was visiting Berlin for a DevFest event, and I got on stage to do a live app redesign. So I was looking at a pretty cool app actually to control the lights in the building we're in, which had an API, but it was kind of like thrown together demoware and didn't really have the best, most modern Android UI. So I was live talking through some things we could change, while a very talented designer, Marie, pretty regularly mentioned on this show, was using her awesome Illustrator skills to throw together these designs. So this, as you can see, Rome just zoomed in on 25 minutes work. We managed to throw together a pretty cool looking redesign, I reckon. So yeah, you can follow the QR code to see a recording of that talk if you're interested.
Yeah, very well done. It was super fast. She works super fast in Illustrator. It's crazy. All right.
Actually, while I'm talking about Marie, one more plug for her.
Yeah.
That she's just opened up an Etsy shop. So she has these amazing paintings of Android. So if you're a fan of little fan art for Android, then look her up on Google Plus and find her Etsy shop and buy a droid.
All right. And I think the last news item is there's a blog post recently that talks about the different units used in Android. So dips, density independent pixels, also SP units, scale independent pixels. If you're still confused about the difference between pixels and dips and SPs and all those different things in density, read this blog post. It's a fairly good primer. We also have good documentation on it, but this may be a simpler way of looking at things. Mm-hmm. And that was by Edwin Evans, who I've never heard of before, but thanks Edwin for the awesome blog post. All right, so that's it for this week on Android Design in Action. Thanks for tuning in, and sorry we ran a little bit late. Unfortunately, we had too much content. It's always a good problem to have,
tough.
right? Too much content.
We just talk too much.
Okay, well, anyway, thanks again for joining. As always, I'm Roman Nurik.
Adam Koch.
Nick Butcher.
See you guys next week.
See you guys.
Bye.
Bye.